What's up, wrestling fans? This is Nick Paglino here, and I am being joined by a very special guest at this time. He is the director of a new wrestling documentary titled 350 Days, stars pro wrestling legends Bret Hart, superstar Billy Graham, amongst many other. It will be in U.S. cinemas on July 12th only. He is the director of the film. His name is Mr. Fulvio Cecere. Fulvio, thanks so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So, I was able to watch, about the first 12 minutes of the film, and I was, this movie coming, and I actually had prepared to sort of ask you a couple other questions, but what struck me in watching what I watched right off the bat, and it kind of hits you immediate. There's been a host of documentaries, that have come out in the past few years where, and even like a movie like The Wrestler, where it's not necessarily a documentary, but it's still profiling a specific wrestler. It's giving the audience a sort of behind the scenes look of what it's like for that wrestler on the road. But what really struck me as unique about this film, and right off the bat, the approach to this film is not so much 350 days for the particular wrestler on the road, but 350 days away from their lives and away from everything else, the people that they care about the most, their families, their children. And now seeing this footage, because, it's not just superstar Billy Graham and Bret Hart. I mean, there's a whole host of legends that are in this film. Greg Valentine, Tito Santana, Paul Orndorff, Bill Eadie, Lanny Poffo, amongst many others. And they all sort of have that through line of talking about what that was like 350 days away from the family. So is that something that you were really sort of going for in this film? And do you think that's really going to help it strike a chord with non-wrestling fans?
Absolutely. So glad you asked that, because you really hit the nail on the head. So let's start off by, because the first question everybody asks is, was I a big wrestling fan? And I wasn't, but I came on board strictly as a filmmaker, because I thought the idea was great. It's very intriguing. My partner had a lot of access to these wrestlers, and he grew up around them. I mean, he was a big fan. And I didn't know anything about it, and I think that helped, because I didn't come to the table as some kind of mark. I came as a director. And so what's interesting about this story? Well, it's about their lives. It's about, being away from their family. It's on the road, how difficult, the highs and lows. So I'd like to tell people this isn't a wrestling documentary. It's a documentary about life. It's a human interest story. It's just that the people we interviewed happen to be famous wrestlers. And just like you mentioned the movie The Wrestler, I keep telling people that's not a wrestling movie. It's about a guy and his relationship with his daughter. I mean, that's what it's about. And, he happens to be a famous wrestler, and we get a glimpse behind the stage of that world. But it's just the guy trying to make connection with his daughter. And how much more real can that be? And that's what this is. The one thing you'll take away from this documentary is how they may not have regrets of what they did, like their life and their career and their passion, but they truly regret missing the birthdays. Even like Bret Hart was saying about, even a little trivial thing like Halloween. That's not even a real holiday, right? But
yeah,
the kids at a certain age, when they're so young and it means so much to them, and to miss that, it's like, it's like, it just breaks your heart. And yet, he was a megastar. He was the champ. It's like, so of course, he hit that level, that high level, and it was worth it. But, he missed a lot. And a lot of these guys did that. And I keep telling people, they think, the lifestyle was so glamorous because they're on TV and they all these outlandish outfits, and you just think they're just floating in money, and it couldn't be further from the truth. These guys usually just packed in cars, or even if they're driving alone, it's a solitary life, and you're on these deserted highways, and you just finished a grueling match, and you got to drive 200 miles when you'd rather be sleeping. And that's what they did. for years. And it was only really starting into like the 90s when they started making a lot of money, like the Hulkamania and all that, is when things started changing a little bit, I think. But during the territory days, I mean, like even Ox Baker was saying you had to wrestle 6-7 times a week because you're only getting paid like $20-$30. So in order to make any money, you had to wrestle that many times.
Yeah, it's really amazing. They all sort of have those similar stories, you know, of the amount of time. I can't remember who exactly it was that said it, but it may have been Superstar Billy Graham when he said, you know, the audience that's watching the show, they finish their popcorn and they're in bed by 10:30. But that's just when the night's beginning for us, because we're getting in a car, we're packing in a car, we're going to the next hotel. You know, by the time we get there, depending on what they do that night, if they eat, if they party a little bit, you're not getting to bed till late at night, and you got to get up 2 hours later, and you've got to hit the next town. So that, you know, that to me just really spoke a lot to. Now compile that, you know, times that by 350 days.
Okay, and so how do you manage that, right? So, and this is what I love about how candid and honest it is, because obviously this wouldn't be something that you would have talked about even, you know, a few years ago. But like Billy Graham, for example, he was just so open and candid about it. It's like, well, you know, in the morning, you got to go to the gym, and then you got to drive to the next location. You got to wrestle, and you got to get to sleep, right? But you know, you party, and so you need downers to get to sleep, and in the morning you got to take uppers to get to the gym, and you need to take whatever it is to help you get to the gym and to keep this physique, and then you got to drive, and it's like how do you maintain all that? And then, or Greg Valentine, where he says, even in the trailer, he says, you know, driving down the road with Roddy Piper doing 8 balls of cocaine, or riding with Flair, drinking 4 cases of beer in between cities. It's like, are you kidding me? Like, how does the body even take that abuse? And they did it, you know, 350 times a year. Now, I know a lot of fans are going to find that difficult to believe. And like even Brett, for example, I've heard that he says it was more like for him 310, 320 times a year. But gee, that's pretty damn close, right? I mean,
that's pretty close. I mean, you know, it's still giving you the scope. You still understand how much time is not only devoted to this, but then how much time is not devoted to the rest of your life.
Right. Yeah, I mean, when you're constantly on the road, I mean, and back then you don't have Skype, you don't have satellite, you know, right. So how do you contact them? You know, long distance phone calls, and like Greg Valentine was telling a crazy joke about I think it was in a hotel in Japan. He called his wife, and they had a little bit of an argument, and the next morning he goes down and he's checking out, and he's like, "What's this?" He's like, "What's your phone bill?" He's like, $800? What? You know? And then Andre the Giant comes up behind him. He says, "If you don't like it, go home." So it was pretty funny. But yeah, I mean, how do you connect if you're constantly on the road? How was that human feeling? You know, my God, what's better to, you know, if you have a girlfriend or relationship, why do you have that? Well, to hold hands, to kiss, to have somebody there to share a life, and you're constantly on the road for your job, for your career. It's like I just don't think the fans really know what these guys went through.
Yeah, and this absolutely gives it a great look, and it comes from a lot of different names, like we were saying. So that brings me to sort of my next question, which is, how did you land on all of the names that are in this film, and how did you approach them? What was and how did you get them to open up like this and really share this story?
Well, it was the very, very first weekend, I think, because like I said, my partner had access to a whole bunch of the wrestlers. So I said I should direct it. And what I did was I started doing my research. I put together a crew of camera guys, and I started looking for locations. And the first one was really, really easy and quite fortuitous because I really felt that we had to make them comfortable so that they would open up and know that there's no agenda, or no WWE bashing or anything like that. It's just we want to know what their life was like on the road. So I found out, we started out in New Jersey, and I found out that Tito Santana, his wife, owns a salon in, I forget what town it was, but it's in New Jersey. So I'm like, well, wait a minute, but can we ask him if we could shoot there? How much more real can that be? He owns a hair salon. Let's shoot right there. So the very, very first interview we have, little old ladies getting their hair cut in the background, and there's Tito talking about his wrestling days. And it was fantastic. And then we went, the second interview was superstar Billy Graham, and he was just, I couldn't believe it, especially because, I hadn't been a wrestling fan. I didn't know what was going on. And he starts talking about the steroids and drugs and ring rats. And I'm like, holy crap, you know the camera's rolling, right? You sure this is what you want? But that was the beauty of it. There was nothing that they wouldn't talk about. They were just so open. Everything was heartfelt. Every question we had, did you ever take steroids? Oh yeah, well I used to take downers in the morning, the uppers at night, or the uppers in the morning, the downers at night, and this hormone and that hormone.
Superstar Billy Graham was talking about. Wasn't he talking about his training regimen with Arnold Schwarzenegger? And he said, you gotta get up, you gotta eat this meal at this time, you gotta take this steroid at this time.
That's right. But think about that. Think of all the controversy over all the steroid use, and Olympics. You get barred and all this stuff, and here we are. It's so open and talking about it and admitting that they did it like it was nothing. And so I appreciate that so much. Now, whether you agree with it or not, that's the beauty of the documentary. Where we're not picking any sides. We're not saying anybody's wrong or right for what they're doing. It's just their life. I'm documenting their life. Yeah. For example.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll mention that Lanny Poffo, for example, was the complete opposite. He even said, at the end of every wrestling match, there's that mandatory party, and everybody goes to that mandatory party except me. I didn't go to that party, and that's why I'm still healthy and wealthy today. Mm-hmm. So it didn't apply to everybody, right? He says you can't blame the divorces on the industry. It's like you blame it on yourself because you did it. So we're just not, there's no sides. We're not trying to say anything except document their lifestyle, their life on the road, and to make sure the fans remember these guys existed and what they brought to the table and the legacy they're leaving.
Was there any particular story, I guess you could say, one of the stories that is in the film that particularly meant something to you? And then also to that same effect, were there any stories that didn't make it, or that you didn't air, or that just didn't make the final edit of the film that you could either share now that you remember, or just in talking to someone that really impacted you, or just had a very lasting memory for you after you were done shooting?
It's I'm so glad you asked that, and I'm not trying to be coy here, or there's just so many. I can't possibly pick one, and I'll explain why. I interviewed 72 people for the interview. It took us about 5 years, and it was like 21 days, 20 or 21 or 22 days of shooting. We've got 120 hours of film. I wanted it to be the most comprehensive, inclusive documentary ever. I didn't want to leave any stone unturned. But how do you include all those people in there? Things that stick out to me. Did you know that we spoke to this one historian? He's like, oh yeah, the kind of common wrestling that we know of today kind of got their start after the Civil War. It's kind of like a part of the Carney, world. I'm like, the Civil War? What? It's been around that long? It's like, yeah. It's like, I just find that stuff fascinating. Yeah. And then I remember I interviewed one guy up in Vancouver, and he had done some. He was like a ring announcer. He'd ring the bell, stuff like that. But he told me an interesting tidbit, and I won't forget it because I don't think fans know it, and I really wanted to keep it in the movie because I thought, this would be interesting, but it didn't make it. But he said that when he was ringing the bell and all that, he would know who was winning the match by the song that they start playing. And I thought that was fascinating. Like,
So what do you
who knew
like
that was
by
going
the
on?
what do you mean by song?
Like some music would start playing in the auditorium all of a sudden, and then he would
Okay.
know that it would be a certain wrestler winning.
Oh, wow.
I think that's just like, yeah, I mean, how would I have known that? How would fans know? And that's something he told me that he experienced. And I thought, wow, that'd be worthy of having in the documentary. But there's just so much stuff that we had. I had another guy I interviewed was, he had a gimmick where he pretended to be the commissioner of Stampede Wrestling. Well, it didn't exist. It existed only to go into the ring and let the heel win, right? So just really cool stuff like that. And then it's just the personalities themselves. I mean, Abdullah the Butcher, we interviewed him at his restaurant. It's a Chinese and rib joint in Atlanta. It's like, there we were in his restaurant. And
Right.
it's just, I just love that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, just way too many to mention. I think that, so like what you said about the two scenes that you saw, those 12 minutes, it's basically an hour and 45 minutes of that nonstop.
Wow.
It's
I mean, that's
just,
great. I mean, because
yeah,
it was really cool seeing the different settings that they were all in. And I think that goes to your point of, how natural the environment was, which is probably definitely what helped them really open up, because you weren't putting them in front of a set necessarily. They were in their own environment where maybe they've told some of these stories before and now they feel comfortable just saying them with a camera rolling,
Well, I may be giving away a trade secret here, but there was one location that I used, and it was a fairly big room, but I shot it to look like three different places, and it does. With the lighting, the way I used the tables, a plant here and there, or angles, and but that was the ultimate thing. They were comfortable. They felt like they were at home. They were sitting on that couch, and there's that plant that they would have in their living room, and or he's sitting at that long dining room table, and this beautiful like depth of field shot, and it's just so beautifully shot. I had such great guys working it. We only used high-end cameras. I mean, God forbid somebody were to not like this movie. At the very least, they can't say it's a good-looking movie. I'll give you that.
Right.
So, but you know what? I just can't see it. I can't, in my wildest dreams, think that a wrestling fan would not like this movie. It's just, that's not me patting myself on the back. It's just that good. The other beautiful thing about it is there's no narration, right? So the whole story is told through their answers.
That right.
And
right.
So you're just hearing their lifestyle. It's like you're sitting in the living room talking to these guys. It's really, the two big words, heartfelt. That's what this movie is.
Well, the last question I want to ask you, and kind of along those lines, is what did you, because you said you weren't necessarily a wrestling fan, and you came into this more as a filmmaker. What did you learn about wrestling? What was your biggest takeaway? Just like whatever non-wrestling fans that watch this film, whatever they may learn, whatever they may take away from it, what was your biggest takeaway from professional wrestling after you were done putting this whole thing together?
Well, that's an easy one for me because it's all ties into me being an actor. I mean, that's what I do for a living, right? And yet I'm never asked to do as much as those guys do. I get an audition, I memorize my lines, I get the part, and I go in front of the camera, and I do my thing, and I go home. These guys, they have to be good on the mic. So they have to have improv skills. They got to sell the drama. right? It's the storylines can be like soap operas. The outlandish costumes they have to wear, like kabuki theater in Japan. Um, they're choreographers. They're directors. They talk among themselves and direct the scene together. It's just, I mean, I'm just in awe. And who would have thought that's what happens in a match?
Right.
And then on top of that, of course, the obvious thing, that these guys are stuntmen. They're athletes. They're in amazing shape. They're bodybuilders. You know, they're former football players or whatever, martial artists. That, you know, these aren't some, you know, lunks, you know, just jumping into the ring. And you know, even the stiff guys, that they know what they're doing. They have to sell it. So I was just really blown away by that. You know,
that idea of, you know, because I think when the fan watches it and what they see is, you know, okay, you know, they're so good at making it just sort of look like, you know, oh, I'm watching a wrestling match. I'm watching a fight, you know, but like you just said, you just broke it down into how many different aspects of theater and production are going on here. There's improv, there's comedy, there's drama, there's memorizing lines, there's improvising work inside the ring and outside of the ring. To that effect, did any of the guys, because throughout the years, there's always been talk of, and there are people on different sides of the fence as to whether or not these guys should be unionized. Should there be a union for them? You're an actor. I'm an actor as well. You know, I'm in SAG. We have a union. We have these certain protections that pro wrestlers don't have. Was that a subject that ever came up in the film? And if it didn't, what's your opinion on that?
well, that's a tough one. And I did stay away from that because, like I said, there's no Vince bashing here, right?
Okay,
the man is he's a genius businessman. He built that empire. Could there be improvements? Could these guys' health be a lot better? Could they be in, you know, better financial shape? Absolutely. I mean, I'm a SAG member. I can't believe that, you know, I may have had a job 20 years ago and they're still giving me residuals. I mean, holy crap, that's pretty friggin' awesome. Right. And yes, you know, I as a union member, I would totally support that. I think that's great, but it's not my position to, as a documentary filmmaker, it's not my position to say that. I'm not choosing any side. Sure. I'm just if they choose to talk about that and they're angry with Vince, okay, that's fine. But we'll mention that. But
was that something you purposely did? You try to avoid any sort of negativity toward, if any one of them were negative about the business or specifically WWE or Vince or anything like that? Is that something you made the conscious decision to avoid?
No, there was, like I said, nothing off the table. Whatever you want to talk about. If you want to bash Vince, okay, go ahead. May not make it into the movie. It may not fit with what you know, but. And as a matter of fact, the really interesting part of all that, I can remember so many of those wrestlers in almost every interview, because they were much older, talk about how great Vince McMahon Sr. was. Right. So, I mean, in a way, that's kind of a little telling too, right? So they may not have overtly or, you know, stated it, but a little subtle dig perhaps. But yeah, there's really not much of that. This is really about their life, the highs, the lows, the success. It's the American story, right? The American dream. You work hard,
and what they would, you know, and well, that's it right there, you know. And it was, I think maybe it was Paul Orndorff that was saying, you know, kind of summed it up so well, saying, you know, when we were doing it, it was all about the money, but then you realize, you know, after the fact, here we are years later, which is great that all this is happening. They're reflecting on it after they've had time to look at their whole career. What it's really about is the time that we missed from our families and, you know, maybe what we wish we had back. And that's something that anyone that dedicates a lot of their time to their job could potentially look back at later in life and either regret or have mixed emotions about. So it is that universal all the way around. And like you said, at the end of the day, it ends up being a family film, right? Because it's what it's about.
Yeah, I mean, you know, maybe not PG exactly because of the talk of drugs and all that, but
no, but I mean it's about family in terms
family.
of
Oh,
not
absolutely.
missing it, not having it, regretting that it wasn't there, or whatever it might be.
You mentioned Paul Orndorff, and it just struck me. I remember he had a really great line in there when he was saying, you didn't know it at the time, but I was manipulating you, and you enjoyed it, and thank you for giving me a great living at it. So I thought that was a really interesting
really cool
line. Yeah.
Well, I really can't thank you enough for taking time here to talk to me. Again, for everyone listening to this right now, July 12th, the film 350 Days. It's in theaters only for July 12th. If you want more information, if you want to know how to purchase tickets, you can visit fathomevents.com. That's FATHOM, fathomevents.com /350 days. And you can get all the ticketing information. Fulvio, thanks so much for speaking with me today. I really enjoyed it.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for your support and your help. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Talk soon.
I love New York.
I love New York as well. Good. So we got that.
Yeah. Okay.